Hey, Carl here to say that Music to Code By is now an app called Music to Flow By. Now you can listen to the tracks on your phone with offline capability. The first 3 tracks are free, and the entire catalog is available by subscription with a new track arriving every month. Just go to musictoflowby.com for all the links. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
We are actually in person in some conference room somewhere looking out the window at Westminster Abbey.
There's Westminster Abbey. We're in the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Center.
Right, at NDC London.
Yeah, new venue for them.
Yeah.
Nice to be in Westminster.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. And yeah, Westminster Abbey, you know, Isaac Newton's buried over there.
Yeah, crazy people. You're walking around and you're like, hey, you're standing on Isaac Newton.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Charles Dickens.
Yeah, don't fall down.
Be careful.
Anyway, Dom and Brock are here, but before we talk to them about security and all that stuff, we have a little business to take care of. This is Better Know Framework. Roll them.
All right, dude, what do you got?
This is a very interesting library at boardgame.io. Now, This is at Google's GitHub repository, but it's disclaimer, it is not an official Google product. And essentially, the goal of the framework is to allow a game author to essentially translate the rules of a game into a series of simple functions that describe how the game state changes when a particular move is made. And the framework takes care of the rest. You'll not need to write any networking or back-end code. So let me go through the feature list of this. There's a state management. Game state is managed seamlessly across browser, server, and storage automatically. It's a web framework, if you hadn't guessed, right?
Right.
Prototyping, the debugging interface to simulate moves even before you render the game. Multiplayer features, all browsers connected to the same game are synced in real time with no refreshes required. Game phases with different game rules, including custom turn orders per phase. Triggers, automatic actions when certain game conditions are met. Secret state, secret information like the opponent's cards in a card game, for example, can be hidden from the client. Logs, game logs with the ability to time travel, viewing the board at an earlier state. And also a UI toolkit, which contains React components for hex grids, cards, tokens, that kind of thing. It's like all the plumbing that, you know...
to go into a digital board game.
Yeah, exactly. Or any kind of game.
You have to wonder if it's like a Settlers of Catan configuration set.
It's interesting, isn't it?
There'd be a possibility.
Yeah.
Very geeky.
Yeah, very geeky, and I thought it would be fun to talk about that. I haven't used it, of course, as I don't use a lot of these things that I talk about, but I do see that they're popular, and this one was trending, so boardgame.io.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1409, which we published back in February of 2017, roughly a year ago, with one Brock, Allen, and Dominick Baier talking about Identity Server 4. So, you know, last year's conversation, essentially. Got a lot of comments on it, as usual, and I could see that Brock responded to a few of them. This one about a year ago, Bruce Windrum, who said, hey guys, thanks for the great work. Identity Server 4 is legit.
Legit.
There you go. It took me ages to understand why we need OpenID Connect when we have OAuth 2 and why we need Identity Server 4 when we have ASP.NET Core Identity. I understand now that they are symbiotic. I have a lot of respect for you guys who really understand and implement OpenID Connect. In my opinion, OpenID Connect is one of those things that are very hard to understand initially, but seem obvious once you already understand it. And he asked a question of Dominick. He says, what's the problem with exposing ADFS, that's Active Directory Federation Services, directly to the public internet? And as an aside, says Carl and Richard, you guys are rock stars. Thanks for producing great podcasts. I've been listening to every single show for more than 3 years. So that would be 4 years now, presuming he stayed with it. And Brock did respond at the time, admittedly a year ago, whether you remember or not. He said, I think Microsoft does not recommend it, exposing ADFS publicly, that they have something called the ADFS proxy, which has got a new name now, I believe. I can't remember what it's called.
Web application proxy.
The what?
The web application
application proxy. That's designed to be a public-facing interface for identity. So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, all good stuff. And interesting to see folks that have listened to the show and taken the stuff on and evaluate it. So, Bruce, thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. Checkmate.
That's deep, man.
Now, I was going to introduce Dom and Brock with, these big, long bios, but these guys are just like, nah, just say we're a couple of security guys. So
I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair.
And not your first rodeo. I mean,
No.
I appreciate that we've been able to check in with you guys on a regular basis about this issue, because everybody has it. And I hope you guys feel this way, that bit by bit, it does seem like the cadre of developers around us are taking this a bit more seriously now.
Yeah, it's amazing. The demand is growing every year. Brock and I do actually the NDC organizers are like really surprised, because before we came along, they never ran a workshop twice.
Right.
So it turns out that every time we did the workshop, we had more and more people. And
I think we've had that experience at Dev Intersection.
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys, other than updates for new versions and things like that, you're doing essentially the same workshop every time.
Right.
And we fill it every time.
And I frequently get people who repeat. Like it's so much information, right? And it's so, it's a complicated topic.
Sure. So they spend 2 days with you.
Yeah.
Then they go back to their work and work on it for a while. And then 6 months or a year later, come back and go, tell me that again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
or the bigger problem is they come there and don't spend the time after that.
Right.
And when they finally need to do it for real,
They're overwhelmed.
then Microsoft has changed ASP.NET Core.
Oh, all right. Well,
And then they need
how
to
did they do
relearn
that?
it again, kind of. I mean, the concepts are always the same. Yeah. I mean, I did more or less the same workshop at WCF times already.
Right.
Yeah.
Just different technology, right?
Yeah, sure.
So
To me, your explanation of claims-based security is the reference. I remember doing it. I think it was at NDC, where
Yeah,
at the
it
end of
was.
it, I started looking and went, that's the best explanation I've ever heard.
Oslo.
Yeah, it just was one of those moments where you nailed it, and we really.
So the reason I think is just that identity is a business enabler.
sure,
Right.
Yeah,
and a requirement,
Yes.
that's I think it's just generally speaking in our community becoming more obvious to everyone that it can't be an also or an eventually or an afterthought.
And even if you don't buy into this idea, 10 years ago or so, where they like there must be the global identity provider, even if you don't buy into that.
Sure.
I think if your portfolio has more than one application, you want to be your own identity provider, so
Right.
that people can change between them without having to re-authenticate all the time.
Yeah.
And or they might have to integrate with external ones and so on. So yeah, the problem is not going away. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the explanation why this workshop is still running.
And I don't hear folks talking about single sign-on munch anymore. Like, this doesn't seem to be a major talking point. But
I think because it's just an assumption these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's just crossed that line of, if I logged in, I want to be logged in.
Yeah.
And there are more and more types of apps that people are building, right?
Right.
So much more APIs, many more mobile apps, spas, right?
Yeah.
So the single sign-on is sort of an assumption these days, but the different types of apps, you need to secure all those different aspects and assets of those too.
So what about two-phase authentication or multi-phase authentication?
Yeah, multi-factor authentication is still highly recommended.
Yeah.
Yep.
There have been some updates actually in ASP.NET Identity to support things like Google Authenticator, which is really a good way to do that.
That seems very open, and you don't have to use the Microsoft Authenticator.
Actually, I was about to say the Authenticator doesn't matter which Authenticator app you use. Microsoft does have a Microsoft Authenticator.
Sure.
The underlying algorithm is the same.
Interesting.
But yeah, you install this app on your phone, and that basically is going to help achieve your multi-factor authentication.
So that you're not getting text messages all the time?
Well, yeah, exactly. The NIST has put out a document discouraging SMS-based authentication. So yeah, more and more.
It was a great kludge. I mean, we're going to send you this number, plug it in.
Unless you stole the phone, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But just to clarify that, though, I mean, SMS is not the highest preferred approach, but it's still better than nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
and everybody's got it.
Yeah, sure.
That's sort of the one thing you can sort of count on.
And that's sort of the downside of the Authenticator app is it's a little bit more user education and, for them to learn how to use it and follow those steps.
Sure.
It's not that bad, but it's just, if it's something new, maybe a text message is a little bit easier.
And thinking in the timeline, when we recorded the last year's show, it was in January, published in February, knowing that 1.1 of .NET Core would drop in March and then 2.0 in August. So it's probably been a pretty frantic year for you with what's happened with .NET Core.
Yeah.
So I told the story actually this morning in our talk. Like all the years before, Microsoft's release schedule kind of coincided with Scott Guthrie's speaking schedule. So then, whenever he was doing a big keynote, they had to release something.
Right.
For this time around, they didn't do it like that. Yeah. So no one really knew when they're going to ship ASP.NET Core. So it was actually at NDC Sydney in August last year. I met Damien and Barry in the elevator in the morning, and Barry gave me a USB stick. Said, "Oh, by the way, here's ASP.NET Core 2. We just shipped it."
Wow!
And I said, "You guys are aware that you changed so many things that a little bit of a heads up would have been appreciated."
Oh man!
So yeah, they tried to do it differently this time, and I think we all agree that something in the middle would be beneficial.
I see. So you talk about Barry Dorans.
Yeah.
Who's always an interesting character.
We always have fun with Barry.
Yes. So you not happy with 2.0?
So I think from an authentication point of view, 2.0 is the best release.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But obviously, since Identity Server is a really, very closely related to the ASP.NET Core authentication system, every time they change something, we have to change something.
Sure.
Right.
And the version 1 system was a direct port from Katana.
Right.
And Katana had the issue of not having dependency injection. So they tried to solve the problem differently.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they introduced this really complicated thing of active middleware and passive middleware. And the active one was your primary authentication method. The passive one was the optional authentication methods. And what happened if you by accident configured two middlewares to be active? It was a completely undefined behavior. What was happening after that?
Yikes.
And so actually, Brock and I opened an issue, I don't know, 1.5 years ago, maybe saying like, you know what, now you have dependency injection. I think you can do a much better job as trying to bend the middleware pipeline to your will. And that's what they did. So basically now in ASP.NET Core 2, you basically throw in basically every authentication method is represented by a handler. And you throw them all into the I container, and then you can pick and choose at runtime which one you want to use.
Right.
And they made the configuration system in a way that you are not accidentally happening to misconfigure it, so that you have two primary authentication methods.
Sure.
And it's much better. And in the talk this morning, we showed how easy it is now to mix and match arbitrary authentication methods. So we added cookies, we added WS Federation, which they just released as a preview. We added SAML2P, which is still a big thing in banks and governments and organizations. Sure. We added OpenID Connect, we added JSON Web Token authentication, all in the same host, and they all can peacefully coexist now.
Nice.
That's good. Is there anywhere that the tools that Azure is offering is sort of encroaching and stepping on your toes, or has there always been a symbiotic relationship?
Well, Azure, we don't really care about Azure, to be honest. I mean, from a identity point of view, right, we are really plugging into ASP.NET Core.
No, I know that, but they also have an identity management offering that came out, a year ago or so?
Yeah.
And is there any symbiosis there with what they're doing? So
Azure has two identity management systems. I think one is Azure AD, which is optimized for employees, right? So if you are a company, you have an Active Directory, and suddenly your employees want to log in from on the road, that's what Azure AD is for.
And that makes sense for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The one problem they never really could solve is the business to consumer problem.
Right.
So they have this other thing called Azure B2C. And that, if you want, is directly competing with Identity Server.
Right. And what do you guys think of that?
So
I mean, the product, not the situation. I can tell you're not happy about the situation, but with the product,
I'm not unhappy about it. I mean, I think we have different target audiences. So the B2C, generally speaking, Identity Server is for companies that have development teams that wanna take responsibility and that want to take the responsibility of building their own platform.
Yeah.
And by doing that, giving them ultimate flexibility how they want to build it.
Exactly.
Yeah. A hosted product, regardless if it's B2C or whatever else, will always operate inside the boundaries of what this hosted product can do.
Sure.
And based on how this today's high density multi-tenancy hosting works is they will never ever be able to allow you to run your own code on their servers.
Right.
Yeah. So if that's fine for you and you don't have these edge cases, then then a product is something you just pay money for and they take care of it.
Yeah, you flip a switch and that's sort of the Azure way, isn't it? I want to abstract
to be honest with you, I never had a single project for the last 4 or 5 years that was fine without doing customization to it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we are still very early in the identity as a service kind of.
SharePoint.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had something stuck in my throat.
Should I start again?
No, you.
He was being funny.
That was a joke. That was an attempt.
It went really well.
It didn't go over very well.
Okay. So yeah. So we're still very early, I think, in identity management as a service. And I honestly believe that the multi-tenancy solution to the problem is not the right solution.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So very often, though, Identity Server, we do work with Azure AD.
Yes.
Sure.
Because that's like a good sweet spot for Identity Server is Identity Server being able to aggregate multiple identity providers.
Yep.
And then your apps, you just use Identity Server directly from your app. Identity Server can handle juggling off to all the others.
Yep.
So yeah, we have tons of scenarios where apps are built by a company and they want the employees to use it, but they want customers to use the same app.
Sure.
So Identity Server helps deal with all that.
Right.
And that's a limitation of both Azure AD and B2C. They don't support multiple types of identities, for example. So put Identity Server in front of that as a abstraction layer, and then we can broker between the two.
Have you guys made a retail version of Identity Server now as well?
Something similar.
Okay.
So the second talk today we did. So maybe you remember that 1 year ago we talked about authorization.
Right.
And
you weren't going to do that. You were an authentication guys.
Yeah. So ultimately, when you're done with authentication, you inevitably have the problem of figuring out what is this guy allowed to do in my application, right? And people ask us like, can't you just build the same turnkey solution? You're like app.use authorization and I'm done.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's not that easy.
So oddly enough.
The interesting observation is that with authentication, once you know all the facts and requirements, there's pretty much only one right solution to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. With authorization, you can use multiple approaches and techniques to get to the same goal. Yeah. So we started basically like once a year ago, basically talking to every customer, like, how do you do it? How do you did it in the past? Are you happy with that? How would you do it if you have to do it again?
Right.
And this basically led to an architecture that we think is the right one, which is promoting the separation of identity and authorization. So we, again, many products try to sell you identity and access management in a single product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you're completely locking in. You have to use their user store, their policy store, their whatever. And I think this might work for some, but it doesn't work for the ones I know at least.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the big issues there by centralizing all of this authorization information is that that's now global. But apps have their own concept of permissions and what a user can do. So in one app, you might have, one permission, but not in the other app. And if the centralized system is feeding that to both apps, you might get confused. So putting that in one place and giving it across all, not knowing the app context is
my favorite example is, like on your passport, there's your date of birth claim.
Right.
Right. But there is no claim saying you are allowed to drink alcohol because that is handled by the endpoint.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
When I'm going to the States, it's
to feed
21.
it. Yeah, right.
In Germany, it's 16 or 18, depending on what you're drinking.
Sure.
Right. So,
in Ireland, it's 8.
Yeah. So identity is a universal thing.
Right.
Regardless where I log in, I'm always the same Dominick. But what I am allowed to do is a very context-specific thing.
Sure.
Very much.
Much more complicated claims.
And guys, hold that thought while we take a moment for this very important message.
This is Dr. Jason Fung. As you may know, my friend Carl Franklin has reverse type 2 diabetes, lost a lot of body fat and got off all his medications by adopting a combination of a low-carbohydrate diet and intermittent fasting. In my clinical experience, I see this reversal happen in multiple patients every single day. Well, Carl is now hosting and producing my new project, the Obesity Code podcast, where patients share their success stories and experts chime in to explain the science. Type 2 diabetes is preventable and reversible, and you can do it for free. Check us out at obesitycodepodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks.
All right, we're back. You're listening to .NET Rocks. Carl Franklin, Rich Campbell, here with Dominick Baier and Brock Allen, talking about authentication. Now we're talking about authorization. And what about the stuff that's built into the .NET framework for authorization? Aren't there whole interfaces and iPrincipal and all of that stuff built in there? Is that stuff that you can snuggle up to somehow?
So,
or does anybody even use that anymore?
Oh yeah. So the problem is a different one, I think. When we talk to all these customers, we realized, there are many approaches to authorization, some more exotic, some more common. The most prevalent thing was they're modeling around roles and permissions.
Yeah.
And the other thing we found out is that none of them ever took the time to build a general solution to the problem. They just re-implemented one or the other aspect of it for each application over and over again.
I see.
So we thought, what about building something that is reusable, that has roles and permissions and a UI and a management API and all these things that allows them to achieve both, the separation of concerns and the reusability and the flexibility in modeling application-specific permissions. And we started to prototype that. And while doing that, we realized, it was easy to get from the idea to a prototype. But making the prototype like a really production-ready thing with all the bells and whistles and the UI and the client libraries and the caching and all, that was a lot of work. So I asked Brock one day, can we afford running another open source project? I mean, given the time we spend already with Identity Server every single day,
right.
Answering questions on the issue tracker and these things. So the answer was no. And yes.
Okay.
So we thought on one hand, we would like to give out the tools to the people. If they like the idea of this separation of concerns that we are promoting, give them the tools to do it. Yeah, the libraries and so on. But the complicated stuff, as I said, the management and the client server and the hosting and so on, I think that has to become a commercial product. And that's what we decided on.
Okay.
So today we announced Policy Server.
Right.
Policy Server.
Which has a website, policyserver.io, which points to the open source version, but you get also a link to the commercial one. So if you want to play around with that and like the idea, you can just get it from GitHub, use it, see if it fits your style. If you have more advanced scenarios like the distribution aspect and the caching and the graphical design of your permissions, then we have a commercial product now.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Well, and again, it's there's a certain group of people, the ones who kept asking you, hey, thanks for the authentication. Could I have authorization, please?
Yeah, you can.
That will, you are, I don't want to say you're giving into the customer, but it's this is what you asked for. So it's got to be done in a sustainable way. I think this whole conversation about that, it's what's sustainable? Because people who commit to this at the infrastructure level of their applications, they need to know it's going to persist.
Yeah. So it's already stunning, that how many people are basically using Identity Server as the backbone of their complete business strategy,
sure.
Right? I mean, they're putting all their customers in there, the most important asset they have. Mm-hmm. And, we've been struggling going back and forth. How do we make this sustainable? And I think one good thing about it is that it's also our hobby still.
Right.
I mean, we love doing that.
You're still enjoying yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, also, we, trying some alternative things. We opened a Patreon page, for example, now at patreon.com/identityserver, I think, where we encourage commercial organizations, customers, or, companies, if you want to make sure that we can keep up the same level of commitment, why not just, give a little bit?
Pledge.
Sure. Yeah, give a little bit back.
Patreon's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And yeah, interesting to see that model applying this way too. Better than trying to build a foundation and recreate the wheel.
And it's actually amazing how many, like single persons, not companies, already gave us something.
Wow.
But I really think the companies should do that and not the employees of the company.
That's
right?
really, it's sort of interesting truth because, of course, the developers are the ones who've been using your product and you save them so much grief. So
they're the ones who see it.
Yeah, and they're actually quote unquote cutting the check.
Yeah, and that's why that's a little bit of a problem. I think that needs to percolate up to the management level a little bit better. Because,
well, I wonder if they can submit it as an expense.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate the idea of Patreon being a low friction way for them to make those contributions on a regular basis.
Richard and I have been toying with the idea of doing a Patreon page as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be it's a good thing.
There are many like podcast style things there, like and artists and comedians, I think, as well. And
it's just a little extra insurance,
There's this guy called Ralphie. You know him? They're doing the whiskey reviews.
Right.
Ralphie.com or ralphiestuff.com, I think it's called. And he has a Patreon page, and that's how he
stays alive.
The thing is, you never know who's going to make a Patreon pledge. In the Two Keto Dudes side of the keto thing, we have a Patreon page, and we get a lot of $5 a month pledges. But we encourage people, doesn't matter how small the contribution is. And then recently we got $1,000 a month pledge from some Saudi Arabian guy who just
clearly
happened to be listening across the world and unscrewed his diabetes and was like, here.
Maybe we should promote Identity Server in Saudi Arabia a little more.
That's right.
Goes well with your Lamborghini.
It's very interesting. And again, it's like the sustainability of these products long term.
Yeah. And I think that is especially a .NET issue.
Sure.
Yeah, because people are not used to that in the .NET ecosystem.
We've been a retail software business for 15 plus years now. And as we transformed into open source, I think folks are struggling to say, well, what's this relationship look like now? How does this look going forward? I mean, Microsoft's paying all these employees to contribute to GitHub repositories.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have that.
Yeah, you're not those
not
guys.
for Identity Server, no.
No.
It's a great model too because you're bypassing the middleman and you're supporting directly the things that mean the most to you on a single platform. I think it's just brilliant. So how has it been, the policy server?
Well, we launched today.
Oh, how's it been?
the first hour was great.
Okay. After that, interest plummeted, right? Yeah.
So you can imagine that there's a lot of work going into that, like the websites and polishing everything up. So we launched this morning, and
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Very good.
I mean, I think for the initial year or so as a commercial product, this will be a little bit new for us. But, and we've done consulting all these years up to this point.
Sure.
So I think that's going to be kind of the model going forward is this relationship. If a customer thinks that this can help and implement their authorization, then
we should also mention that it's not just the two of us.
Sure.
We actually have Michelle on board, Michelle Leroux Bustamante, which has a history in authorization, actually.
Certainly.
Sure.
Yeah. And we just, realized that we have to share the same passion for the problem. And we've been working on that for pretty hard, actually, for the last 6, 7, 8 months. Yeah.
Wow. That's great.
That's really exciting.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to report that I tried to write a joke today with a laugh level of 10, but alas, I didn't have permission. So we have to have level 1. That's all I can give you.
AKA situation normal? Turns out it was a permission problem all this time? Who knew?
It's actually time to give away a D-Experience subscription from Dev Express to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with Dev Express UI controls and libraries and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. And check out their Dev Extreme React grid, built from the ground up to fully support all the cool features that come with React, like the virtual DOM and state controllers like Redux. It supports master detail, sorting, grouping, paging, and editing, and you can check it out and test it for free on GitHub. But learn more and download your free 30-day trial of DevExpress Universal at devexpress.com/superhero.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Danny Allegreza.
Oh, congratulations, Denny.
Yes. And Danny just won the D-Experience subscription, a big pile of awesome from my friends at DevExpress, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world, and every show we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you got to sign up to win. And of course, guys, it's your turn. I don't know how many times you've done this.
Been a few. Yeah.
You know, this is the most stressful part of your show.
You're not the first person to tell me that today.
I mean, for a week or two, we've been thinking about this.
Kicking stuff back and forth.
Yeah.
We actually were talking about it last evening.
Yeah, too. Well, so for mine, I think I have in mind. Do you guys know what MAME is?
Oh, yeah. Multi-arcade machine emulator.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's basically like all those upright box video games, the arcade video games that I used to play as a kid.
They suck the ROMs out and you can play on Windows.
Yeah. So with the show Stranger Things that came out recently, it's kind of like they're redoing the 80s, and they have like the characters on are playing Dungeons and Dragons and playing Dig Dug in the arcade, and all of those childhood memories are coming back to me. So it made me remember how much I missed those arcade games. So with $5,000, that's what I would do. Is I would buy a box, get all the right, joystick controls on that, and set up a MAME.
The form factor of that box is built around a 4.3 CRT.
Yeah.
It's actually going to be hard to come by these days.
That's why it's $5,000.
Yeah, nor do you want one. So I think you'd actually want an HD screen format box, a little bit wider than conventional, but you're going to have a better screen for it.
Or a 16:9, but in sort of portrait mode. Yeah, right? You could do that.
If I'm playing Defender, I'd like some extra width.
Absolutely.
More gunning room would be good.
Yeah, only if you're going to have the emulators obviously are square and in that 4.3. So you're going to have a lot of wasted space. But man, I got into MAME a long, long time ago. But this really speaks to this retro thing that's going on with young people right now. And I do consider you a young person, believe it or not. I'm just saying.
I don't know. You have more gray hair than I do, but
that's because you keep yours
cut short, really, really short. If it grows out, the gray comes out. So,
but and this is just an aside. I have a band with horns, and it's badass, right? The Franklin Brothers Band. We play nothing written after 1985. Most of our stuff is from the 60s and 70s. And it's just, I see more and more young people coming out to listen to us and not complaining that we're not playing Uptown Funk.
Modern music,
So I think there is this really big surge among millennials, and I know you're not a millennial, but among millennials to rediscover the music of their parents' generation.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough of that. What's your $5,000 going to be spent on, Dominic?
So I had a hard time. But basically, one of the most important things that I wanted last show, I think, was my big green egg.
Oh, yes.
So I have that now. So I was thinking, like,
wait, we got to back up and tell people what it is if they haven't been paying attention for the last 10 years.
It's a smoker. I mean,
and a grill.
Yeah,
it's a Kamado oven.
A tandoori.
It could be a tandoor if you want.
Yeah,
if you're brave enough. But it's a ceramic egg-shaped thing with a firebox and grates and the plate setter, which is a blocker for doing proper smoking, and a beautiful device.
So you've got one.
I got one, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But did you get the fan controller?
I did.
See, that's when you geekify a perfectly harmless, literally Iron Age device.
So the fan controller is like a thermostat, and you basically say, I want you to keep this temperature.
Basically, when you're doing like long jobs, as they call them, right?
Nice.
Where like your brisket or your pork shoulder, where it's 10 hours, and you could stand next to it for 10 hours and make sure it doesn't,
constantly controlling the temperature. See, I've done that, but I drink while I do it. So at some point, I order a pizza. Like, you just stop caring.
Yeah, good point. So I thought, like, now that I don't have to control the temperature anymore, what is the best thing to do while the pork shoulder is in there? Mm-hmm. It's brewing a beer.
Yeah,
sure. Which actually takes a lot of time and attention. Like,
which is roughly a brew day is roughly 6 hours.
Right.
I did that on low tech gear.
Yeah. But a shoulder smoke is about 6 to 8 hours. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so you could have a complete brew day while smoking the shoulder.
The meat was doing the thing.
Or your brisket. So, as I said, I did brew some beer on low tech stuff, but there's one. I'm a big fan of Brewdog, and when they started,
you could drop $5,000 at Brewdog.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You could give me a $5,000 voucher.
Yeah.
So when they started, they had there's a kit called Brew Magic from Sapco,
right?
And it's basically a 50-liter kit for, but it's a bit geeky. It has a computer and advanced temperature control. And
tell me the downside.
It's more than $5,000.
Okay, sort of a down.
So I'm just saving
extra shiny to me.
I'm just saving my $5,000 for next time, and then I'm gonna get it next year. Okay?
Exactly. You guys keep doing a show together. Like, one of these days, you got to present a $10,000 solution.
Yeah, right.
We're gonna pool the money and do this.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting idea. But then people would want to win $10,000 shopping sprees as well.
Who wouldn't want to win
Who wouldn't want
$10,000
that?
shopping spree?
Right.
So yeah, Sapco Brew Magic. It also looks so cool.
Nice.
Okay. Speaking of brewing and distilling, have you used that still that I gave you yet?
After the basement flood,
Yeah.
we are still reorganizing things. So
Yeah, but
I
that-
basically haven't had a summer.
Yeah.
So it's purely a time problem.
Are you
but-
planning to?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, there's a few interesting things. That a set of equipment
Yeah.
offers a number of possibilities.
One could speculate.
One could speculate, giving that particular set of gear.
Yeah.
But, to your point about Sepco and the Brew Magic gear and so forth, it's like the resurgence of craft beer has a lot to do with the reduction in cost of reliable technology for making relatively small batch beer.
Yep.
A dozen keg scale, not 1,000 keg scale.
Yep.
And that it's hip to do now. There's now 6 brew pubs in walking distance of my place.
Yeah.
That all brew their own beer and don't sell it more than, 2-3 miles around.
But to be honest, the situation in Germany is not like that.
Well, because of the Heidelberg rules, I think.
The purity law
Yeah.
is one problem, but mostly, the thing they call free houses here in London, basically a pub that can sell any beer at once,
Right.
doesn't exist in Germany. Basically, you log into one brewery,
Right.
the local one typically,
Yes.
and they sponsor your umbrellas and your ashtrays.
Right.
And
And you have glasses that are specific to that
yes,
beer.
exactly.
Like that's the German
the
style.
whole craft beer thing is pretty much blocked by these two things in
Very
Germany.
interesting problem.
I think it sucks.
I think Germans who stay in Germany don't know better, but you've traveled enough that you've seen what happens when you have a place with 100 different beers. And it's like, oh, you like Ruby Ports? Let me give you 6 options.
Exactly.
You were saying how in Germany, though, it's just recently that they allow you to import beer, like mail order, right?
No, importing was always allowed. But the thing is, if a brewery doesn't conform to the purity law, they're not allowed to call it beer.
Interesting. So what do they call it?
One brewery recently came up with something called better than beer. And actually, because we have this huge lobby in Germany, like the Warsteiner and the Bitburger and the Becks, they just sued them. And they had to destroy it.
Not enough to shut them down. They
had to destroy the beer.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and the whole purity law thing, I mean, on the way they're marketing it is like, Belgian beer is really, really bad because it doesn't conform to the purity law.
Oh,
Right?
save
And
me.
as you all know, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's lovely stuff. I mean, the lambics are crazy. What they are.
I like them.
Yeah, no, but it's an adventure. Hey, we should do some work today.
Yeah, we probably should get back to it.
And I do want to drive back into authorization just because there is so many aspects to this. Like you jumped immediately into role based, which for better or worse, most people still know and trust that one. But under the hood, it's all actually claims based anyway. It's just that one of the claims is the role.
So the way we think about that is that the claims are the input to the authorization policy. So the user authenticates, gets back his identity, and then we send this identity to the policy system, and it will use either rule-based things or static mappings to basically turn that into the permissions for the given application.
And I do like the booze example. Here is my birthday.
That's all I can remember.
Yeah. Here is what I want to drink, right? The fact that I want a spirit versus a beer, I actually can play a role in what you're authenticated to.
Yep.
Like, it's a nicely complicated problem.
Yep.
And so how old are you? What did you want? What time of day is it? You know, like in the U.S., it's not no alcohol on a Sunday.
Are you at an airport? Where time zones don't matter.
Don't actually mean anything. I think that's really interesting to be that in some respects, how do you map that out? That for someone to successfully authenticate this claim, this right, they have to, it's almost an equation, an expression of something.
Well, there's a balance there. Mm-hmm. And the approach that we looked at was trying to be general enough that can be used across many different applications. And there was, Dominick was talking this morning on the talk about Exacamal. Exacamal, that's the XML access control markup language.
The extensible.
The extensible
access control markup
game.
And so that was an older technology, XML based, that allowed you to kind of do what you're talking about, which is where you could, in XML, model your business logic about authorization.
Okay.
The funny thing about this, though, one, we're not still using it generally today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd never even heard of it.
Nope.
So, and the kind of the weird thing about it is that you're in your app, you have to export all this context. Like maybe it's the customer record and who's the salesperson for it and the current user. Turn this into this message and send it out of your system to this Exacamal system. They would go off and run these rules you're talking about and give you the result.
Right.
And so do you really want to write your business logic in that when you're already in your app and your C# code and you have...
Yeah, you want to just go if this, then yes.
So there's
no.
a certain amount of logic that we realized that is not authorization logic. It really is just business logic.
Sure.
So what we tried to do was come up with walk that fine line between what made sense to centralize and allow this mapping mechanism. And ultimately what we do map to are roles and permissions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But those are application specific. Then the app gets those back, can make its kind of coarse-grained authorization decisions based on that. But anything beyond that, we feel is really meant to be in the application.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some easy no's, but possibly some harder yeses.
Yeah.
So you get past the easy no's with the policy side, and then you pull the rest in to finalize, okay, we are going to get to a yes.
Yeah. So fundamentally what we allow you to model is for a particular application, okay, what are your roles in this application and what are your permissions?
Right.
And the whole point of the policy server system is that it is multi-application support.
Right. If you've given them the rights to sales data in one app, it should be presumed reasonable for another app.
Sure. You can do that. We actually even have hierarchies of policies.
Oh, interesting.
So you can have some amount of reuse, if you will, across different contexts.
Yeah. You might have a suite of applications that share the same users, right? But each application has different permissions. You want to draw from the same user pool or the same role pool, but each application, you have different things. Yeah. Or you might have...
But there might be some intersection points there.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So if the users are in particular roles in both apps, but different apps have different permissions, you want to get the reuse of the role mapping, but different apps get the different...
Do you have customers with a scenario where permissions change on a second-by-second basis or maybe based on actions or something like that, so they need to be able to pull those permissions from the internet?
Well, not so much second-by-second, but and not around maybe arbitrary decisions, what your permissions may or may not be. But so this hierarchy that we were just talking about to reuse roles, we also can utilize that hierarchy to actually model different resources in a system. So I had a customer who I built an authorization system for them, 5 or 10 years ago, and they had it was for fire marshals to go into a building and inspect the fire alarms.
Okay.
And so they had really strict rules. I'm not sure why they had these strict rules, but they had these really strict rules where a certain fire marshal could get assigned to a floor,
Yeah.
to a room, or to a device in the room.
Wow.
So they had this hierarchy that they needed to be able to assign permissions, authorization to.
Right.
And so that was another use case that I really thought we needed to be able to solve with Policy Server. And so the idea here is that then, maybe, Rich, you're assigned to room 1, device 1, right? But Carl's assigned to all of floor 2 or something.
Right.
So the policy system supporting these hierarchies, what you can do is model your domain in these hierarchies and assign roles and permissions at the various levels.
It does feel like an ACL hierarchy too, right?
Yeah, in a
Where
sense.
you might be assigned read and write, or read to the directory, but only write to this file.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could also create them at runtime. So think of
Like an IoT system.
GitHub, for example. Yeah,
okay.
That's my favorite example, where you have a user. The user creates a repo, right? So the repo, think of the repo now is a policy in our system,
right?
And now the user can go and give proc push access, right? So GitHub defines a fixed set of permissions globally,
yep,
right? But the repos are created by the users themselves at runtime, so you can.
And they need privileges,
yes,
or need to be able to share them out.
But you could use Policy Server to outsource the permission management to a service. Yeah,
so we have an API that you would then call from within your application to configure this hierarchy and say what users can be assigned what permissions.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of a situation where things change outside of the system, like an IoT system. So, if a sensor picks up that something is happening in this part of the building, we want to block access to everybody else to that physical building. So it might lock the door or give you no access to go in there and change your codes.
What we have right now is in the client library, we can configure how often we anticipate to change the permissions. So basically, like we have some intelligent caching in there that you don't, for every single call, you don't want to do a network round trip, right? So we can cache that for a certain amount of time. What we are thinking about is what you are describing is having maybe webhooks, right? Where you can notify like, hey, policy has changed.
Yes.
Yeah. That's not in version 1.0.
No, but it's an interesting scenario that, I think it was that first talk in Oslo that you told us about where the light bulb went on, that it's all about authorization is all about business rules. It's about what can you do? What can't you do? How much are you allowed to see in all of that? And, in a homogeneous system world like this, where you've got lots of inputs and things happening, it just kind of makes sense.
Well, and I appreciate the idea that there's certain class of rules that can be genericized.
Yeah.
But you're inevitably going to get to a point where it's like, this is specific to the app. I want that code in the app. I don't want to push it to a common store.
Yeah. And that's why Exacamal, as that example, didn't ever take off.
You could get an Exacamal MAME game. That'd be kind of cool. I don't know what the controller would look like.
No, you can have your 5,000 back now.
I hid the gopher, but I didn't have the rights.
And you can tell that when companies start writing DSLs to create Exacamal.
Yeah, there's a path to hell. We want a way to generically express that, and this is not code you should write. This is plumbing. Right, it's security plumbing, it's important plumbing, which all the more reason it's got to be done right. How are you guys feeling about the new rules in the EU around the General Data Protection
GDPR
regulations?
It's first of all a huge money making machine for consultants.
Oh sure, like cha-ching, right? Everybody's afraid now.
Google for GDPR. The first things will be sponsored by the big.
Well, every time there's like big policy changes, like I remember Sarbanes-Oxley, all the security consultants were like, cha-ching!
Thank you.
There's a second one right now going on in Europe. It's called PSD2, the Payment Service Directive number 2, which basically will force banks starting this year to open up their APIs. So basically transition from banks to banking.
Right.
Yeah. So another interesting one. Where actually identifies, we have a couple of customers who are banks or like in the fintech industry where this is really happening this year and it's really important. But coming back to GDPR, generally speaking, GDPR is a really good idea because it gives control back to the consumer.
Yeah. Well, and the teeth around data breaches, just that alone, there's many things in GDPR, the right to be forgotten, but this whole, if you've got a breach, you don't get to sit on it for a year.
Yeah.
You've got to get it out there.
There's legislation in the U.S. that I heard just was passing around that, where the U.S. government agencies themselves, when they detect a breach, now have a policy that they have to follow in terms of disclosure. And so they're all being forced, at least the government agencies, to follow the same, basically, way to react to it. Yeah, exactly.
What's definitely interesting is that GDPR is not only for European companies, it's for all companies dealing with European companies.
If you sell to Europe, you need to comply.
Yep.
And you are exposed to fines.
Yeah. So I have many customers who are right now having a GDPR project.
Sure, I bet. Just basically, because there are audit requirements and things like, would we pass this audit? Where are we going to stumble? What does that look like?
Yeah, and the other thing which I think really makes sense is that you can't repurpose data anymore with GDPR. So let's say you're taking part in a price draw, you give them your email address. They can't use the email address afterwards to send you a newsletter.
And without express permission.
Without explicitly asking you for permission. And in OpenID Connect and OAuth, there's this concept of consent, where the end user consents before the client application can use the data, or even the provider releases the data.
Right.
Yeah. Another interesting challenge of GDPR is now that you basically have to be able to retroactively remove the consent again. Yeah. And not only for a single application, but maybe for the whole organization. Yeah. So, interesting.
Yeah. That right to be forgotten is actually a really small piece of the document. I've read it, but then I read it as a developer. So, this requirement gets handed to you and you go look over at a system and you're like, wow, this is going to be really hard. Like, that is not a small thing to do.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Are there any features of the latest identity server we haven't covered that people might be interested in?
Good question. So
because you're still version 4, right?
Well, think of 4 as the generation.
Okay.
Naming is hard. But Identifier went through several generations. The first 2 were all about WS security, WS federation, and so on. And then between 2 and 3, we decided that this is not going to be the future, and just basically threw away all the code and then start from scratch with OpenID Connect and OAuth, and that was the right decision, I think. So the current version right now is mostly an update to ASP.NET Core 2.
Right.
Yeah.
So
some details have been added. We have added more support for logout scenarios and so on, because logout is an interesting one, because nobody really cares about logout until they have the requirement for it. I wrote a blog post this morning about, NDC 2018 update, where I have all the links to all the stuff we showed basically in the talk.
Yeah.
I don't think they're like the main talking points really, but little details that have been added. From our point of view, the biggest news is support for WS Federation, so that you now can finally support ADFS with ASP.NET Core.
Right. Which
I think is really a shame that Microsoft took 2 years to support their own stuff. Yeah. And to be honest, the fact that ADFS support, and they don't even talk about WS Federation support, because who cares about WS Federation? They want ADFS support, which happens to use WS Federation.
On the hood,
the fact that ADFS was not supported is a reason why many companies are blocked up till today to move to ASP.NET Core.
Interesting,
right? Because they have this existing infrastructure. Why
you're not going to
I don't want to throw it away.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. So they are very close to releasing the final version of that. It's working already. We found some minor things, and that there's a guy from Sweden, Anders Abel. I call him Mr. SAML. So whenever I have a SAML question, I ask him, and he's right now in the process of writing SAML support for ASP.NET Core.
Interesting.
So, if you're a government agency, a bank, an insurance company, these types of companies, they have a good investment in SAML.
Right. They've written their own token providers.
Exactly.
They care
or
about
bought commercial ones, right?
Yeah.
So again, for them, lack of support is a blocker for ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
which means it's a blocker for identity server. Sure. So yeah, these two things we showed today. They are they are released both in preview, but they will be done soon. That's the biggest news for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Awesome. So what's next besides reveling in the release of your new server?
Obviously, 1.0 doesn't have everything that we would like in it, but I think we definitely have a roadmap that we're going to be implementing probably over the next...
Contact with the customer is going to put some pressure on that, I'm sure.
That's absolutely what we were thinking. So that's what I was saying earlier, pricing and all that's all going to get figured out. But I think the best way moving forward to work with customers on this is to do a little bit of a consulting style, get feedback from them. They can kind of learn from us the right way to be modeling this stuff, and they get the product as well. But I think that is going to be a good feedback loop for us to have more features down the road.
The roadmap starts at the pub, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Where does it end? Where does it end? That's a good question.
Yeah. Usually ends at a pub, too. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. And so congratulations on Policy Server. And thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks for having us.
All right. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1. Recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.